On Saturday, the 18th of April, we had the honor and pleasure of speaking with the founders of Kollapscamp. Tadzio Müller and Scully are German activists with long histories of organizing and protest. They joined us to talk about solidarity prepping. This is the first of two videos. Today, we'll talk about the origins of Kollapscamp. In our next visit, we'll talk about the upcoming training camp, Mutual Aid H.E.A.T, or Hostile Environment Awareness Training. For more information, please visit us at kollapsclub.com. By way of brief introduction, Kollapscamp bridged the gap between inner work and outer work. They shot up a flare so high and bright that it can be seen around the world. That heroic effort is why we are here today. But there are hundreds and thousands of people everywhere working to protect their homes and their neighbors' homes and their community. You may be among them. Those efforts in towns and villages around the world are not often known because they are intentionally local. But they deserve attention because they are inspiring and successful and useful. We must help each other to find each other so that we may inspire each other. Starting today with the people gathered here, we want to become a network that gathers and publishes information to bring solidarity prepping to the attention of the world. Kat.
Thanks, David. Tadzio Müller is a queer political scientist and global justice activist living in Berlin in Germany. His work explores the intersections of socio-ecological crises, capitalism, and social movements. Tadzio has been involved in radical justice struggles for more than 25 years, in particular in the climate justice movement. Since the defeat of the climate struggle, he has focused his work on trying to answer the question of how do we still have radical agency within collapse. His book, Between Peaceful Sabotage and Collapse, How I Learned to Love the Future Again, will soon be published in English.
Scully is a queer activist living in Thüringen. She used to be an Egyptologist before she stumbled into the occupation of Hambacher Forest in 2017 and somehow never really left again. She has joined and organized many mass actions of civil disobedience, fighting fossil fuels, Nazis, and nature destruction. As the far right rises, she's currently trying to get some Antifa organizing started in her small hometown, as fascists are literally getting closer to her door. In 2025, she was one of the organizers of the first Kollapscamp, and together with Tadzio, she wants to take the next step this year to stop talking and start getting stuff done. She says she won't leave the H.E.A.T camp without creating the first group of Pink Panthers for queer self-defense, which we'll hear more about today. Now we begin. Here are Tadzio and Scully.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thanks to David, Kat, and Susan for organizing this. This is hugely exciting for us. I think, Scully and I, we haven't been in an international meeting of this size and with so many people from so many places. So it's incredibly exciting because, well, basically one of the things that we've been doing in the past few years is we've been working on trying to build what we call a collapse movement. And I want to tell you, I'm going to start telling the story a little bit. Because I've been an activist, a global justice activist since the mid to late 90s. Actually, David and Susan are from Seattle. That's where sort of my journey started in Seattle in 99 at the WTO protests, where after like a whole decade of feeling completely bereft of any political agency, we were like 10,000 people in the streets of Seattle that seemed to make new worlds possible, that restarted history. And from that, I basically spent 20 years organizing mass civil disobedience. I discovered the climate issue in 2007, 2008. Immediately realized that it was probably going to be the cause of the collapse of industrial global civilization. but proceeded to organize a social movement around it, because that's how I have understood, that's how we develop collective agency, right? Basically, the 90s was all about globalization. Nobody said you had any agency. And then the global alter globalization movement emerged. And within that, we actually seem to have agency. So when I encountered the climate movement, I immediately set about with many others to build a sort of radical climate action movement in Germany and Europe. And basically, we fought for 10 to 12 years. We occupied coal pits. We showed the whole world that Germany isn't an eco champion, but actually this huge, disgusting lignite mines, and actually sort of an eco villain. We fought against the normality, the fossil capitalist normality here. And that was, in a way, the meaning of that was my meaning of life, was being an activist and fighting for communism, like hedonistic communism, or climate justice, or whatever you want to call the sort of the major goal of our struggles. That's what all my life was about. And when in 2021 I realized that we had essentially lost, I lost the meaning of life, and I lost myself in the depression. When I say lost, I meant I understood that climate collapse, as in the tipping of the global climate system from a stable to an unstable state, was already in progress. I also understood that society was kind of done thinking and talking about this issue because it just evoked too much shame and fear and guilt. And lastly, I understood that that was essentially going to be one of the causes of the rise of fascism. Because in a world that goes more and more crazy, it's actually quite rational to become a fascist, because the fascists just tell you, never mind the world, you have no responsibility, there are no ethics, you can just shit on it all and enjoy collapse, like a sort of crazy fascist death cult that celebrates its own destruction of the world. And at that point, I fell into a deep depression, and I essentially, like, I'm sort of gay Berlin party boy, and like my partying and my drugs. And I would eventually tell my lovers and say, let's just take drugs until the end of our lives every day, because that's still going to be more fun than being chased by fascists through the world, in a collapsing world. And so that was where I was in the middle of 22. I was basically, my life was over. And then three things happened that I want to just quickly run through. First, a pride march was attacked by a right winger who punched and beat to death a steward, a young trans man named by the name of Malte. That was a horrible experience for the whole trans and queer community. But in a way, it left me angry, but not as desperate, because I understood that there was stuff to do in this collapsing reality. There was still a meaning to life. Maybe it wasn't the fight for climate justice or for communism or whatever goal you want to set, but maybe it was the self-defense of our community against this madness that was arising and that basically threatens our lives every day. And that brought me back to life, because I knew there was a cause, like organizing the self-defense of our communities against the fascist threat. And then Lützerath, there was a small village in West Germany that was going to be destroyed for a coal pit. And the whole climate movement gathered in our Alamo, in our last struggle, to defend this village. And we were beaten. The village was destroyed in 2023 to make way for a coal mine. And yet that struggle, being there with these people, allowed me to find the movement again, right? If Malta's death had showed me the cause, in Lützerath I found the movement. That basically I understood that agency doesn't just arise from in a situation where we think we're going to win or from victory, but agency arises from the connections I develop with the people around me, from movement. And so I understood that if there was a world in collapse, then we'd have to build a movement for that. And then I came to visit a friend in Sweden who taught me about prep, like solidarity prepping, who taught me about how the best defense of a community against fascists was actually organizing itself to help each other in catastrophe. He taught me about this surplus of solidarity that arises in a catastrophe. And I understood suddenly that basically that organizing our self-defense and organizing community structures in this catastrophe was the new cause. And I understood that movement was still the right way to organize agency in this world, because that's what many of us lack, a sense that we can do something. And lastly, I understood that solidarity prepping together for catastrophe, was the strategic way to go. So the idea of this collapse movement literally saved my life, because it showed me what I could do no matter how dark the world got. And so we came up with this idea of the collapse movement. And as the first thing we wanted to do, we thought, let's do a collapse camp. And at that point, I'll pass. Hand on to Scully with only 6 minutes, with 1 minute overtime. I'm sorry.
That's perfectly fine. The camp we had last year happened, yeah, at the right time, I have to say. because people were kind of ready. They were waiting for us. We had the feeling, because when we organized it and we started talking about it, we got so many requests of people who wanted to join, which was a little bit overwhelming, I have to say. And in the end, we gathered with around 900 up to 1,000 people for 4 days near Berlin. And we offered them something that was completely new. We offered them at first lots of workshops and inputs and practical skills dealing with emotional care, because we understood, even if Tadzio and myself having some issues or some troubles with being too open or being too too emotional in groups and dealing with things that way, but we understood that especially collapse is something where people go through lots of emotions, and where dealing with these emotions is an essential step. So we offered them lots of workshops dealing with that, and this was the focus we had for doing that. We also offered lots of workshops with practical skills. We ended up with 103, I think, workshops, and it was just amazing. People came together and went through this and learned that we have a space. We created a space to talk about collapse, and this was something new. And then we also kind of created the term collapse activism, because that's what we wanted to do. We just didn't want to stare at this big word of collapse. We wanted to get active and we wanted to do something. And the good thing that came out of Kollapscamp were also that it was kind of a kickoff for some regional organizing that happened. There were lots of groups starting and getting into work dealing with emotions on the one hand, and also some groups who really got the practical stuff going. So we have a network now in at least one bigger city after the Kollapscamp that is able to establish communication. It was a week full of very happy and very new experiences. And I brought you some pictures, as you can see, just to get you a little impression. Lots of people around, they were camping. Besides the first day, we were very lucky with the weather. We cooked together. We had different workshops. Here you can see the guy that Tadzio was talking about, the guy from Sweden who introduced him kind of to solidary prepping and is therefore very important for the first Kollapscamp. He is involved in a group called Stop the Bleed, and we were very lucky to have them. As you can see, it got a little bit bloody over there, but we learned first aid. We learned to deal with lots of different things. We still call it a movement because we still love our movements and we need movements. And also within Collapse, we need to get organized and we need to get stuff done. So Kollapscamp last year happened with around 900 people and opened up a new field of activism. It brought together lots of new people. We managed to get out of our bubble of just regular climate activists within their 20s. We had lots of people in the age of 40, 50, 60. We had lots of queer people. We had some people you never met at camps before. I've been at lots of camps and activistic stuff. And this was the first time for years that I went to a camp and didn't know 90% of the people. So it was a very good thing to leave our bubble and to get new contacts, to establish new connections. And that's where we are at the moment. We opened it, we started it, and now we see where we can take us. There are different approaches now, as we already said, and Tadzio and I, together with a couple of other people from the last year organizers, we have an idea for this year, because we realized already within the Kollapscamp that what we really want, we wouldn't be able to reach it with Kollapscamp. We have to do something else. But Kollapscamp was important, and there's going to happen one again this year, which we are very happy about, beginning of August, because we kind of see that it's still needed. We need people to have an access to Collapse itself, to talk about, to share their emotions, to sneak peek into different approaches. And we plan something we always consider as step 2. Once people are kind of collapse aware and got an impression what is possible, what can we do, we want to create the place and the structures where they can come next and really get things going.
That is,
Feedback?
I mean, one addition, I think, like, because you started talking about how we had the emotional workshops and the practical workshops. I just wanted to add that one thing, that one of the innovations, like German activism, all the cultural cliches are true. We suck on emotional work, and we're really good in organizing tactical and wonderfully strategic blockades and great campaigns. And I think this collapse camp brought that together. Actually, people who wanted to work on on the emotional side of things and who wanted to get practically engaged, putting those things together, I think, was one of our key innovations. So just wanted to add that.
I would like to point out that when I first learned about Kollapscamp, it became clear to me that you had a very personal impetus to organize such a difficult undertaking. And it seemed to me that you started with queer self-defense, and that was the seed that blossomed into the entire enterprise. And that's significant, I think, because you came from a place of being a marginalized community struggling for your survival. And that, I think, is where activism comes from. Our community is less so. We are white, middle-class people of the global north. And we struggle to find that very personal impetus. So perhaps you could talk about the origins in your personal experience.
So thanks for that. I know that sounds like a silly line to say, but thanks for that great question. Because when I mentioned the thing about Malta, like both Scully and I are queer. We're both very, as I said, loudmouth, foul-mouthed queers. We're also anti-fascists, and the fascists don't like us, both on a local level and like more in general, abstractly. And now I think, like most existing collapse discourses, collapsology and deep adaptation come from quite white privileged academic backgrounds. Now, Scully and I are both white privileged academics. She's a PhD in ancient Egyptology. I have one in political science. But it's our exposure as queers that really brought us to this sense of urgency. Like when I said, like when Malta was attacked, like Nazis are challenging our pride marches more and more in Germany. Like that sometimes means that you have a pride march, like some cool, funky drag queens dancing, and 20 meters behind them are like brutal looking Nazi skins shouting like queers out of our neighborhoods, and this is a Nazi neighborhood, and death to the queers. So basically, this threat for us is very real. Scully has been threatened twice in the past few months by Nazis, like physically, directly. When we talk about preparing for catastrophe, we're not just talking about an abstract, like there might be a heat wave or a flood. In Berlin, there might not be a flood, but we're talking about a catastrophe that happens to our queer and trans friends like every day right now. For us, there is no sense of being able to prepare for a catastrophe in the future. We have to be able to develop agency now. And that's exactly what our goal is. Like developing collective agency in this shitty situation. Because we're convinced that from there, people can start being less afraid and actually start developing like collective structures. But this is like our desire to immediately create agency is connected to the fact that we need that agency right away. We have no time. Like when we are in some of the German collapse discussion groups, people always seem to be preparing for stuff in the medium to long term future. And I don't even know what framework they're talking about. I we feel this threat every day, and I think that mixture of our highly privileged position and, as you said, David, as an affected community, I think that's what brings the dynamism here. So we can because we can use all the tools that we have because of our privileges, but we use them in the service of this cause of community self-defense, and that I think gives the energy plus our ADHD and neurodiversity. But that's I think fairly common in contexts like these. There was a question in the chat I just saw. What brought people to the camp? And that was like Scully already mentioned a little bit that we got a different crowd than you get at a normal climate camp, where the median age is low to mid 20s. A lot of people have done that type of action before in the last years, but haven't been political for a long time. So the I had this sense that we were a camp for people who have failed in their lives or who have had an experience of catastrophe or collapse in their lives. So for me, this was a bunch of things. Like for me, I'm HIV positive. That's, by the way, another motivation for me to organize, because obviously if my meds disappear, I die within a few months to a year or two. And I don't even want to talk about what the US aid cuts have caused for I mean, there'll be 3 million deaths, preventable deaths in sub-Saharan Africa as a result of the USAID and PEPFAR cuts. So I don't want to, but essentially for me, this is one of the things about solidarity prepping, what my friend Per taught me. He's like my Yoda. The guy from Sweden. And he told me that solidarity prepping begins not with the imagined needs of others, but with your own needs. So being HIV positive has created an immediate need for me to organize with others to create structures where we can help people who lose access to their medication. Obviously, that won't be privileged me first. That'll be immigrants, it'll be refugees, it'll be poorer folks. Forgive me that in half of all US states, poor people are being cut off from HIV, access to HIV meds. It's a terribly shocking thing. So I just wanted to make people aware of that. So I mentioned this because I've had experiences of catastrophe. I've been tortured in a police cell. I'm HIV positive. I have lost political struggles. And folks at the camp were people who had been like failed energy engineers who were like, I can't build another wind farm because I'm just fucked off with it. Failed corporate advisors who were like, we've been teaching people in companies about eco stuff and they just don't give a fuck. So we're done with this stuff. But also people who've experienced personal catastrophes. It was a camp for people who have understood failure and defeat and are dealing with it somehow. Maybe not have dealt with it, but are dealing with it. And that's what brought us together. And that was really amazing for me to see that also sort of I am not famous for my humility. I have very little, but there was a certain humility in that camp. I think humility is overrated. But there was a certain, in that sense, a political humility at that camp because there were people there who have understood failure and are trying to deal with it. That was really different.
So
Go ahead.
there was one here with an extra comment, which was, how do you make space in your movement and your camp for elder, disabled, or queer people? And just an acknowledgement of how important accessibility is in these contexts.
In terms of elder people, I mean, there was, I think the oldest participant in the camp was in her early 80s or late 70s and was walking with a cane. Now, a camp as a form definitely imposes certain complications in terms of accessibility for folks who, for example, are in wheelchairs. Because I mean, it's hard to have a wheelchair when there's muddy tracks. And given that we're a beginning movement with very little resources, at some point we said that there's going to be limits to access if you are, for example, in a wheelchair. We can't accommodate that. I mean, basically, queer access was significant, partly because Scully and I, two of the most visible people of the camp, are queer. So we attracted a lot of queers and also communicated clearly with queers. But I would say, honestly, that questions of accessibility have not been at the forefront of our mind, but questions of actually viability of the camp were our primary concern. So basically, when we get asked those questions, the response is usually, there's a lot to do in that regard, and we're fully aware of these questions. For example, we deal with them when people respond, "Hey, can we come and we have these or these limitations." But right now, we're also highly limited in terms of our resources, both in terms of money and of labor power. So there are limits to what we can create in terms of structures that enable accessibility so far.
But what we've learned is to speak about that, to say no, or to say these are the limits, rather than having people there disappointed and not being able. And we asked people, please understand, we can't make it, 100% perfect, but please let us know what you need, and we try to make as much as possible. And it kind of worked, but especially for elder and queer people, I think it was the to see us who are organizing it. We were not the 20-year-old activist. We were not 20 years old queer people, and we are talking about being queer and being not the role model of an activist. So that was really a key factor, I guess.
I want to point to the failure just a little bit. A lot of people are scared by what they imagine is coming, and they are afraid that nothing we do can be enough. So what is it about this kind of effort that you are doing and we are doing that matters now, even in the face of overwhelming circumstances?
I'd say
say
this. No, go.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we could just do nothing. That won't help anybody. We could keep going as we did. That doesn't help that much as well. So we thought about, well, we should maybe stop pretending that we might be able with the next action, the next blockade, or the next whatever, to save the world, or to get to fade out fossil fuels, to smash capitalism or whatever. Of course, we want that, but we should, be honest and be realistic, and we we should do something, and start at a certain point and make that thing growing. But it to us, that's also part of failure. I failed a lot. I mean, I'm not working as an Egyptologist anymore. I don't have a regular job anymore. I spent a year in jail. I haven't smashed capitalism. Well, I didn't save lots of forests, no matter how long I occupied them. So, but giving up, it wasn't an option. And I was like, come on, let's at least be honest, and not go out there and pretend this time we will win big. Because I think everybody knows we won't, not at the moment. But sometimes we need some, realistic goals uh, to motivate us and to keep us motivated again. Because if you go out there dreaming big and then you fail, sooner or later you get frustrated. Of course. So let's go out there with some realistic goals and do something, and then maybe others join in and it grows. So that's a thing.
And I want to connect to that. That basically, if we think that basically we have to reconstitute what activism and political practice is for collapse. So basically, we have to abandon the major positive horizons because collapse does not allow for that anymore. And basically, we think that we're currently bringing to the table a realistic analysis of the situation. And therefore, what we can do is, right, you've noticed maybe that the fascists have a much more explicit collapse and breakdown of society discourse than we do. One of the things that powers them is the fact that mainstream progressive discourses are so different from what people experience in their lives that they don't connect with them. So there's essentially a kind of unarticulated energy that people feel when everything goes to shits. I call that collapse energy. And basically, our pitch is, and right now the fascists are soaking up all of that because the center doesn't acknowledge it. When we start acknowledging reality, we can actually connect to people's real feelings and experiences of the current situation. People are fucking terrified. right? And to actually have a progressive story that acknowledges that, yes, we are terrified. The odds are totally against us. We're probably going to lose. And if we then tell a realistic story that actually gives people agency, if we show that people have agency, like our idea with this Pink Panther self-defense brigade, right? We want to show videos of Pink Panthers successfully defending a pride march. I have this vision of like a sort of grainy video where like a drag queen is attacked by 3 Nazis, and then that drag queen beats the living shit out of these Nazis. And then that video circulates in like Nazi chat groups, and they become terrified of ever attacking another drag queen because they think that they might know like Krav Maga and is one of those dangerous Pink Panthers, right? If we can tell a story where the other side starts being a bit worried about us, or when there's, say, a catastrophe, a flood, and people think not just, oh, I hope FEMA arrives, but I hope these amazing activists arrive because there was a flood recently over there or a tornado, and then these people came and they set up these amazing kitchens and these amazing, like, out of action kind of trauma care spaces. That's what I want. And that we feel that's what we want. And that's what we think is a story that people want to hear right now. It's like, hey, we have a story without bullshit and real agency and real community. And we think that's quite a good sell. Basically, when a catastrophe hits, everybody has understood by now that there's a surplus of solidarity when a catastrophe hits. Everybody has read Rebecca Solnit by now, and we get that. Right? We want to organize that surplus of solidarity so that people can experience life as, there's no adjective for this in English, solidaristic. There is one in Germany. Like basically, can experience a life of and in solidarity. And if we're right, and there'll be more and more catastrophes in the future, then understanding that catastrophe can be a space of solidarity and organizing is something quite powerful.
Right. Because then if you get in touch and in contact with people in that way, they might be wanting to listen to all the other things you got to say. Then you can start again talking about climate or talking about organizing that and blah, blah, blah. But at first you have to get in touch with people. And if they are annoyed of, Antifas or climate activists or whatever, then we shouldn't approach them in that role, but we should approach them maybe in a solidarity way and offering them help or something they need or whatever, so that they understand we are not the enemy. And we don't have the big answer, because I just read here what we want beside or after capitalism. I have no idea. I know communism on a state level failed, but I don't want to answer these questions anymore because I have no idea. And I don't think we have time to do years and years and years more discussing things like that. I want to go out there, and if I reach out to people and they see I can offer something, or they see, oh, this group is amazing and they have this idea and this solution and they really help me and it makes my life or the life of my community better, then that's what we want, because then maybe they start listening again and transport that idea and transport this experience, and then they start doing this as well. Our kind of dream or goal is, if we're talking about building up networks and structures, to have a map, and there are maybe 5 red dots at the moment, and sooner or later we want to add more and more dots so that you know where to reach out, where to find information about that and help in that situation, so that you don't have to look 500 kilometers away, but maybe in your neighbor town, whatever. So that's what we want, and not keep going and talking about capitalism, communism, state communism, or whatever other name you can come up with. That's not the time by now, and we probably won't find the right answer.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information about Solidarity Prepping, please visit us at kollapsclub.com. I'm David Baum in Seattle. This is Collapse Club. Until we meet again, farewell.